Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Alone 2020, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. Some films whisper before they scream. They tiptoe into your mind, settling in the soft edges before they seize your breath. This one wastes no time pretending to be quiet. Its first frames pulse with dread, a gray sky draped across the horizon like a warning, a winding road that cuts through nothing and leads to nowhere, and a single vehicle crawling along the pavement like it's trying to escape something, or someone. There's a certain chill that sinks into your bones before the story even begins. There's no backstory offered. No context. Just a woman alone, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses and her hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. You don't know her name yet. You don't need to. You feel her urgency. You feel her fear. And within minutes, you understand, this is not a vacation. This is flight. What unfolds next is deceptively simple. It isn't dressed in elaborate world-building or tangled in subplots. It's a streamlined descent into one woman's battle for survival. She's leaving behind a past that's never spelled out, only hinted at, murmurs of trauma, shadows of grief, the kind that wrap around your ankles and follow you wherever you go. She's trying to start over, to get somewhere else, anywhere else. But on the road through the wilderness, escape becomes a myth. The man she meets seems ordinary at first. Slightly awkward, vaguely intense, but polite. Just a stranger, she tells herself. Just a driver who happened to be behind her too many times. But then he shows up again. And again. The wrong places. The wrong times. His politeness frays. His words begin to curdle. And that's when the story tightens like a snare. What begins as unease becomes pursuit. What begins as coincidence becomes calculation. She is not imagining it. And she is not safe. What's so terrifying isn't just what happens, it's how grounded everything feels. The terror here isn't cinematic. It's intimate. It's the kind you feel in your spine when you sense eyes on you in an empty parking lot. It's the primal, ancient alarm that goes off when a door closes too softly. There are no jump scares. No gimmicks. Just reality, honed to a knife's edge. When he finally reveals who he is, there's no villain monologue. There's no gory spectacle. He's just hollow. Familiar. The kind of man who lives next door. The kind who wears the same shirt to church on Sundays and keeps his lawn mowed. That's what makes it worse. That's what makes it real. As the chase spills out from roads to forest trails, from campsites to riverbeds, the landscape becomes its own character. Thick trees that feel too close. Rivers that move too fast. Darkness that arrives too early. The wilderness doesn't offer salvation, it amplifies the isolation. The silence here is different. It doesn't comfort. It erodes. And yet, there's something about her. This woman who never asked for this war, who never signed up for this nightmare. She's not a superhero. She doesn't have training. She bleeds. She breaks. But she endures. And that's where the film finds its pulse. Not in spectacle, but in resistance. There's a scene, no spoilers, where she's faced with a moment of absolute surrender. She could give in. No one would blame her. But she doesn't. Not because she thinks she can win, but because something in her refuses to let him be the one who decides how this ends. That moment, raw and quiet and crushing, may be one of the most powerful you'll see in a story like this. What the story does so brilliantly is strip away everything except what matters, the will to survive and the terror of being hunted by something human. Not a creature. Not a ghost. Just another person, with a face and a voice, who made a choice to harm. There's no traditional structure. No safe middle act. The film pivots quickly, from psychological tension to brutal survival, and once it does, it never lets up. The forest becomes a labyrinth. The days blur. Injuries stack. Sanity wavers. And yet she keeps moving. Because what waits for her if she stops is worse. But this story doesn't just live in adrenaline. It cuts deeper. There are moments, fleeting, aching, where we glimpse what she's running from. Not just the man behind her, but the grief inside her. The film doesn't over-explain. It shows us with glances, with flinches, with the way she touches a photograph but can't bring herself to look at it. Her pain is never turned into a plot device. It's just there, like a wound she carries under her skin. And then comes the turn. You might think you know how this kind of story ends. You think the hunted becomes the hunter. You think she'll rise in revenge, transformed into something unbreakable. But this film doesn't cater to fantasy. Her strength doesn't come from fury. It comes from fear, refined, repurposed, weaponized. She doesn't fight because she wants to. She fights because she has to. And in that fight, we see something rare, survival as an act of rebellion. The final act is relentless. A sequence that plays with tension like a violin string stretched past its limit. And just when you think it's about to snap, it does. In a way that's neither expected nor exaggerated. In a way that feels right. Because what this story understands is that the most cathartic ending isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just one breath, one step, 1 second more. When the credits roll, there is no cheering. There's just stillness. The kind that settles in your chest and makes you sit with everything you just witnessed. Not because it was shocking, but because it was close. Because you could be her, because maybe, in some way, you already are. This film doesn't chase the idea of heroism. It doesn't glamorize violence. It sits in the quiet horror of what it means to be hunted, to be alone, to be underestimated, and then to fight back anyway. It's a lean, tight, merciless piece of storytelling. One that trades excess for precision. One that remembers that fear doesn't come from what's hidden in the dark, but from what steps forward, smiling, in the light. And somewhere in that forest, in the tangled noise of branches and breath, one woman refuses to disappear. She is not here to be saved. She is here to survive. There is no music when it begins. Just the sound of rubber tires humming across wet asphalt and the faint breath of someone trying not to cry. The camera doesn't give us a sweeping shot of where she's headed, because that doesn't matter. What matters is that she's leaving. Driving alone. Past empty forests and shuttered rest stops, through the graying haze of early morning. Her face is drawn, like someone still recovering from something she's never named out loud. You can tell this isn't a trip. This is an escape. She drives a moving van. Small, old, the kind you can live out of if you have to. The windows are rolled down just enough to let in the cold. Her eyes flick to the rearview mirror every few minutes, not out of paranoia, but habit. Like she's been looking over her shoulder for a long time. At a gas station stop, she pays in cash. Says almost nothing to the clerk. Keeps her head down. She's alone, but it doesn't feel like solitude. It feels like exile. Her name, eventually revealed, is Jessica. And even the name feels hesitant on her tongue, as though she's still deciding whether to own it or leave it behind with everything else. She's alone, but it doesn't feel like solitude. It feels like exile. Her name, eventually revealed, is Jessica. And even the name feels hesitant on her tongue, as though she's still deciding whether to own it or leave it behind with everything else. She doesn't talk much, not because she's shy, but because the world has taught her not to waste her breath. There are flashes of a past, never fully shown, a hospital bracelet tucked into a glove compartment, a voicemail she plays but never finishes listening to, a framed photo she keeps wrapped in a towel and never looks at. The road winds north, farther into the wilderness. The towns grow smaller. The distance between them stretches longer. Trees rise like sentries on either side of her, their branches swaying in a language she doesn't understand. She parks for the night in a rest stop nestled against the forest edge. It's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in, that makes your ears ache with the absence of sound. She locks the doors, pulls the curtains, sleeps with the key clutched in her hand. The next morning, a stranger knocks on her window. He's polite, smiling, says his car broke down a few miles back and asks if she's seen anyone else stop nearby. She's caught off guard but manages a terse shake of the head. He doesn't linger, just thanks her and walks back toward his own vehicle, which she now notices in the distance, idling awkwardly at the curb. She starts her engine, doesn't look back. But something about him unsettles her. Not what he said, but the way he said it. As if he'd rehearsed it. As if he already knew her answer. The second encounter is harder to dismiss. She pulls onto the highway, hours later, only to spot his car trailing behind her again. He keeps his distance at first, then creeps closer. Sometimes he passes her. Sometimes he falls back. It isn't aggressive. It's measured. Like a game. Like someone studying her from behind glass. She tries to dismiss it. Tells herself it's just coincidence. The road is long. Maybe they're heading the same way. But when she stops at a grocery store in a small town and sees him waiting at the exit, leaning against his car with that same calm smile, she knows. This isn't a coincidence. This is a problem. He approaches. Doesn't pretend this time. He knows her name. Compliments her choice of route. Mentions something specific about her van. Something he couldn't have seen unless he was close. Too close. She doesn't respond. She walks past him. Gets in the van. Drives off. Her breath quickens. Her hands shake. The world outside the windshield begins to distort, not with panic, but clarity. She's not imagining this. She's being followed. The film doesn't cut away. It stays with her. In the cab of that van. Through the winding roads. Through the mounting dread. She makes a plan. Pulls over in a well-lit town. Walks into a police station, unsure what she'll even say. She's calm. Rational. She explains what's happening. The man. The behavior. Her concern. The officer listens, politely. Nods. Jots things down. Then smiles and says they'll keep an eye out. She knows what that means. She's been told that before. So she thanks him, walks out, and doesn't look back. That's when she sees the man again. Parked across the street. Watching her. She speeds away. This time she doesn't stop for gas. Doesn't eat. Doesn't sleep. The van rolls into the deeper woods, where reception cuts out and road signs begin to vanish. She finds an isolated campground, deserted, silent, and pulls in for the night. She sets up quickly. Parks near the edge. Covers the van windows with blankets. Hides the keys in her jacket. And for the first time, allows herself to feel it. Fear, sharp and unfiltered. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She just braces. Like someone expecting a storm that has no sky. Night falls like a curtain. Deep, impenetrable black. The kind of dark that doesn't blink. Every crack of a branch outside becomes a scream in waiting. Every gust of wind, a footstep. And then a light. A flashlight. In the distance. Moving toward her. Unsteady. Casual. She doesn't wait. She bolts from the van and hides behind the trees, her breath shallow, her heartbeat rising in her ears. The light grows closer. Then stops. Footsteps. Muffled. She doesn't dare look. Eventually, silence. She waits. Hours pass. Only then does she return, carefully, slowly. The van door is ajar. Not broken. Not forced. Just left open. Inside, nothing's missing. But everything is touched. A toothbrush slightly turned. Her bag moved an inch. Her photo unwrapped. She backs out. Turns the ignition. The engine stutters. Then catches. She drives into the night. The next day brings no relief. She's pale now. Hollow. Paranoia has become her compass. But it's not paranoia if you're right. At a remote stop on a dusty stretch of highway, she catches him watching again, from the woods. Not even trying to hide now. He smiles. And then, without warning, she crashes. A deer. A slick patch. A moment of inattention. The van slides off the road, slamming into a ditch. The windshield spiderwebs. Smoke spills out. She crawls from the wreckage, dazed, injured. Blood in her mouth. Pain everywhere. And through the haze, he appears. Come. Collected. Kneels beside her like an old friend. You should have stopped running, he whispers. She blacks out. When she wakes, she's not in the van. She's in a cabin. Remote. Wooden. Stripped of her belongings. Her wrists are tied, but loosely. A fire crackles nearby. The man sits across from her, sipping something from a tin mug. And smiling. What follows is not torture. Not theatrics. It's worse. It's normalcy. He talks. Casually. Calmly. About the world. About being misunderstood. About people like her who always think they're alone when they're not. He never raises his voice. Never threatens. He just explains. Like it's all reasonable. Like this was inevitable. But Jessica listens. And while she listens, she watches. The door. The windows. The knife near the fire. And she waits. Because if there's one thing she's learned, it's this. You don't survive because you're stronger. You survive because you don't stop. The cabin is quieter than death. There's no music, no ambience, just the creak of old wood and the fire's dull whisper as it fades to embers. Jessica lies on the floor, bound at the wrists, her face half lit by flickering orange light. The man watches her from across the room with a casual detachment, like he's admiring a painting he doesn't yet understand. He doesn't speak much, and when he does, it's in soft tones that bend around cruelty like silk. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't scream. He simply is, and somehow that's worse. She's listening, really listening, not to his words, but to the space between them. She counts his movements, tracks the sound of his boots on the floor. There's a rhythm to him, predictable in the way predators often are when they think they've already won. He moves like someone confident that the fight is over, like the hunt is finished, and the only thing left is to bask in the control. That's his mistake. Jessica isn't broken. She's calculating. Hours pass. The fire dies. The shadows grow longer. The man leaves the room, and that's when she moves. Slowly. Carefully. Her wrists, tied with cord, have begun to bleed from her attempts to wriggle free, but the pain is fuel now. She finds a splinter jutting out from the wall. Works against it. Keeps breathing. Keeps bleeding. Until finally, the cord frays enough. She finds a splinter jutting out from the wall. Works against it. Keeps breathing. Keeps bleeding. Until finally, the cord frays enough. It snaps with a whisper. She doesn't bolt. Not yet. She waits. Hears him moving in another room. The sound of a kettle. A drawer opening. No locks on the windows, she realizes. He didn't even bother. That's how sure he was. But she's not leaving without a plan. She scans the room. Her eyes land on a rusted tool belt, half hanging off a hook by the door. A screwdriver. A hammer. A flashlight. She takes the light. Stashes the screwdriver in her waistband. Footsteps again. She moves. Out the window. Into the forest. The cold slaps her across the face as she hits the ground and runs. The night swallows her. No trail, no path. Just endless dark and the sound of her own breath tearing through the silence. But the woods don't save her. They turn against her. Branches claw at her skin. Roots trip her. The cold burns. And behind her, distant but steady, the sound of boots on soil. He's not rushing. He's not calling. He's just following. Like he knows there's nowhere for her to go. She finds a creek, freezing and fast, and plunges into it. The current pulls, but she uses it, letting it carry her downstream, her body stiff with cold and terror. When she crawls out, she's miles away. Shivering. Soaked. But alive. She finds shelter beneath a fallen tree. Waits for the sun. It doesn't come. Just a gray dawn, soft and colorless. Her body aches. Her face is bruised. But her eyes are sharper now. She begins walking. Through endless woods, guided by nothing but instinct and a gnawing sense that she's being watched. Eventually, she stumbles onto a hunting cabin, abandoned, skeletal. Inside, a cot, a cracked window, and, miraculously, a radio. She tries it. Dead. She finds a hunting knife tucked in a drawer. Takes it. Night comes again. With it, the man. He doesn't knock. Just appears in the doorway like the dark itself let him in. She doesn't run this time. She hides in the shadows. Waits for him to step fully inside. And then attacks. It's not elegant. It's not clean. It's survival. The knife catches him in the arm. He growls, not in pain, but in frustration. The two of them crash to the floor. He's bigger. Stronger. But she's wild now. Animal. She stabs. He hits. The struggle spills outside, into the dirt and snow. Then, a misstep. She kicks. He stumbles. Falls down a shallow ravine. She hears the thud of bone. Then nothing. Jessica collapses. Bloodied. Shaking. But not done. She limps to the edge. Looks down. He's gone. The imprint in the snow remains. But the man has vanished. She doesn't wait. Doesn't scream. Just moves. The next scenes bleed together. She wanders. Finds a ranger station. Locked. Smashes a window. Gets inside. Uses the landline. Dead. But she finds supplies. A map. A flare gun. And finally, a moment to breathe. Then she hears it. The distant drone of a vehicle. She runs outside. Waves. Fires the flare. A pickup truck pulls up minutes later. An older man, gray-bearded, kind eyes. A local hunter. She can barely form words. He helps her into the cab. She sobs. Tells him just enough. They drive. And for the first time, she thinks maybe it's over. But the story isn't done with her yet. The man, that man, appears one last time. On the road ahead. The hunter stops. Gets out. Approaches him, calm but cautious. Then the gunshot. Jessica screams. The hunter falls. The man takes his place. Slides behind the wheel. Drives off with her. The final stretch is brutal. She's handcuffed now, beaten, bruised beyond recognition. He talks again. Like nothing happened. Tells her about his childhood. About how it always comes back to one thing. Being seen. Being understood. You saw me, he says. That's why it had to be you. She doesn't respond. Just stares. Waits. He makes one mistake. He pulls over, tries to get something from the back seat. She kicks, slams the door into his head, grabs the steering wheel. They crash. Again. This time harder. She wakes in wreckage. Smoke everywhere. The man is alive. Barely. Crawling. She drags herself out. Finds the flare gun. Stands over him. He laughs. "I knew you had it in you," he says. And she fires. Not at him. Into the trees. Into the sky. A signal. Hours later, rescuers arrive. She's found. Alive. The man is gone. No body. Just blood. And silence. Jessica doesn't say much in the aftermath. She doesn't need to. Her eyes say everything. The final scene is wordless. She walks out of a hospital. Alone but not broken. She breathes. She steps forward. And the road opens. She is not introduced to us with fanfare. No sweeping backstory, no dramatic flashbacks to explain who she was or what she's running from. Instead, we meet her as a woman in motion. Driving. Watching. Leaving. Alone. Jessica doesn't enter the story like a protagonist. She seeps into it, quietly, with eyes that speak more than her mouth ever does. And that's where her power lies. In stillness. In restraint. In the haunted, exhausted way she takes up space without asking for any of it. At first glance, she's forgettable. That's the point. She's not built from the cinematic mold of survival heroines. She doesn't have witty quips or secret skills tucked up her sleeve. She isn't running from monsters. She isn't training for vengeance. She's just surviving. Because what came before, what's only hinted at in fragments and unfinished phone calls, has already hollowed her out. But here's the thing about Jessica. She may be quiet, but she's not weak. She's grieving, not passive. Grief can sometimes look like silence, like withdrawal. But inside her is a storm that no one, not even she, fully understands until the world forces it out of her. When we watch her drive away at the start, we're not watching escape. We're watching resistance, quiet, slow-burning resistance. And that's what defines her. From the beginning, there's an ache behind her eyes. It shows in the way she double-checks every locked door. In the way she flinches when someone stands too close. In how she folds in on herself when someone speaks kindly to her. She has endured something that stripped her belief in the safety of others, and yet she keeps going. She doesn't ask for help, not because she doesn't need it, but because she's been taught no one will offer it when it counts. She's the kind of character who watches more than she speaks. And that gives her a sharpness people underestimate. Especially him. The man, her pursuer, the predator, makes the same mistake so many others have made before. He sees Jessica as small, isolated, an easy target. He smiles with the smug confidence of someone who believes he understands her. That her silence means submission. That her fear is weakness. But every moment she spends in his presence, each twisted conversation, each carefully calculated escape, she is learning. Watching him just as he watches her. Reading him like a map. And that's where the story sharpens. Because Jessica is not just reacting, she's adapting. Every encounter leaves her scarred, yes. But more importantly, it leaves her prepared. She doesn't suddenly become superhuman. There's no training montage. No moment where she magically becomes someone else. Instead, she finds survival through endurance, through instinct, through the quiet, relentless refusal to be erased. She bleeds. She breaks. But she never stops. And what makes her so powerful to watch is how human she remains throughout it all. She gets scared. She makes mistakes. She freezes. She hesitates. There are moments when you can feel her on the edge of surrender, when the idea of giving up seems less painful than the idea of going one more step. And yet, she keeps going. Not because she believes she'll win, but because she knows the alternative is not living, but disappearing. One of her most striking traits is her ability to stay grounded even when the world around her spirals. When she realizes she's being followed, she doesn't scream. She doesn't overreact. She tries to reason. She goes to the police. She follows the rules that women are told will protect them. But the system fails her, as it fails so many like her. And when that illusion crumbles, something in her shifts. Jessica begins to understand that there's no help coming. That she is, as the title whispers, truly alone. But instead of letting that truth consume her, she lets it forge her. Not into a weapon, but into someone who refuses to be prey. Her strength emerges not in explosive action, but in the smallest, quietest moments. When she stays perfectly still behind a tree while he shines a light through the darkness. When she swims through the freezing river, teeth chattering, lungs burning, just to put distance between herself and the man who won't stop chasing her. When she stitches herself together in the dead of night, shivering, crying, but continuing. And then there's the moment in the cabin. When she wakes, tied and bloodied, faced with a man who speaks in soft tones and masks cruelty in calmness. It would have been easy for her to give up then. To fold. To accept the fate he's written for her. But Jessica doesn't. She listens. She watches. She waits. Because she knows that he's not invincible. He's arrogant. And that arrogance is a crack. That moment where she escapes, not because she's stronger, but because she's smarter, isn't just a plot point. It's a reclamation. It's proof that survival doesn't belong to the loudest or the most prepared. Sometimes it belongs to the one who refuses to be written out of their own story. Jessica doesn't become a killer. She doesn't lose herself in vengeance. Her victory is quieter, more resonant. She walks away, not triumphant, but intact, not healed, but whole. And in a genre that often glorifies transformation through trauma, this story does something different. It honors the kind of strength that doesn't look like strength at all. The kind that doesn't roar. The kind that limps, bleeds, keeps breathing. The man, her stalker, her captor, is never given a grand identity. He has no tragic backstory, no motive that's meant to humanize him. And that's crucial. Because this story isn't about understanding him. It's about refusing to center him. He's not the puzzle. He's the sickness. He's the reason the world tells women not to walk alone, not to trust, not to be too visible or too quiet or too strong or too weak. He doesn't want her to fear him. He wants her to see him. And that's what makes Jessica's defiance so powerful. She doesn't give him the satisfaction of meaning. She doesn't ask why. She doesn't negotiate. She just endures. She just survives. By the time the film ends, she's walking again. Alone, but not broken. And though she says nothing, her presence speaks louder than anything the man ever said. She is not rescued. She rescues herself. And through her quiet, aching, defiant survival, we are reminded that strength doesn't always look like it does in the movies. Sometimes it's a woman with bruises on her ribs, mud on her face, and silence in her throat, walking through the wreckage, not because she's brave, but because she's still here. There are some films that tell stories. And then there are films that seem to carry something with them, an energy, a weight, an echo that doesn't quite stop once the credits roll. The one we're talking about now is deceptively simple on the surface. A woman, a man, a chase, the woods. But what unfolded behind the camera, in the weeks it took to bring that story to life, is the kind of thing you don't read in press kits or see in blooper reels. Because what happened on set was far stranger than fiction, and in some moments eerily aligned with the very fear it was trying to recreate. Let's start with the beginning, the casting. Jules Willcox, who plays Jessica, was not the original actress slated for the role. In fact, the original lead dropped out just 10 days before filming began. Not for the usual reasons, not scheduling conflicts or studio politics, but because she reportedly had recurring dreams of being followed through the woods. She called the director the morning after her third nightmare and said simply, "I can't. I'm sorry. This one's too close." The production scrambled. Casting directors sent out a dozen urgent calls. And Jules, who had just wrapped an entirely different shoot, flew in with only 2 days to prepare. She never read the full script. "Liked it that way. I wanted to feel what she felt," she said later. "No answers. Just the raw need to keep moving." And that unease? It bled into everything. The movie was filmed deep in the Oregon wilderness, miles from any major road, surrounded by trees that towered like ancient witnesses. The production chose the location because it was cheap, quiet, and offered a kind of isolation you can't fake with camera tricks. But that isolation came with its own set of problems. For starters, there was no cell service. None. Not for the actors. Not for the crew. Radios barely worked beyond a few hundred feet. That might not sound strange at first, until you realize the bulk of the shoot happened at night. In dense, unfamiliar woods. With only flashlights, generators, and a skeleton crew. It got to the point where the team developed a series of flashlight signals, 3 short bursts for cut, 2 long for need help, and so on, because shouting would get swallowed up by the trees. The director, John Hyams, insisted on filming in sequence. It's a rare choice in modern filmmaking, usually due to budget and logistics. But he wanted the tension to feel real, to let Jules unravel alongside her character. And it worked. She didn't know what scene was coming next until the morning it was shot. Her emotional fatigue, the gradual breakdown of her voice, her eyes growing darker and more reactive, it wasn't method acting. It was truth. Then there was the house. That secluded cabin, the one where Jessica is taken, wasn't built for the film. It existed long before the movie. An old hunting lodge abandoned sometime in the 1980s. The production team found it on a scouting trip, hidden down an unmarked logging road. No one had touched it in years. When they broke the lock on the door, everything inside was coated in dust. Furniture, boots, dishes still in the sink. On the mantel was a faded photograph of a man standing in the same doorway Jessica would later flee through. The production wanted to clear the space, dress it from scratch. But Hyams said no. He wanted to leave it intact. "The place has a memory," he told the crew. "Let it speak." And then came the lights. During one night shoot, the lights in the forest began flickering without cause. These were high-powered LED rigs, mounted carefully and powered through generators checked meticulously every morning. But this night, one by one, they dimmed. Not all at once. In sequence. Like something was walking past them. The electricians couldn't find a cause. The generator was fine. Cables untouched. But the footage from that night, raw, unplanned, is some of the most unnerving in the entire film. Jules wasn't acting. She was reacting. Watching light disappear into shadow, step by step, as if the woods were closing in. One of the crew members quit the following day. He didn't give a reason. Just packed up and left. And it wasn't just the lights. It was sound, too. Boom mics picked up faint audio during scenes that were supposed to be silent. Not wildlife. Not wind. Just murmurs, low, broken words that no one on set recalled hearing. "It sounded like someone walking behind her," said the sound engineer. But there was no one there. Not even a shadow. The files were scrubbed and analyzed. No distortion. No interference. Just voices. They left it in the mix, faintly, during one of the scenes in the woods. Most won't hear it. But some will. The man who played the antagonist, Marc Menchaca, did something unusual to prepare for the role. He isolated himself from the rest of the cast for the duration of the shoot. Lived in a separate cabin a mile away. Walked to set each day alone, never speaking until the camera was rolling. Jules didn't see him out of character once. That silence between them? The unease? Completely real. He also never rehearsed. Every scene was done raw, fresh. The moment between him and Jules in the cabin, the conversation where he finally breaks her down psychologically, was done in one take. She didn't know what he was going to say. Neither did the crew. His entire monologue was improvised. The silence after he finishes? That was her real reaction. Frozen. Unblinking. And then there were the shoes. Strange, maybe. Small. But it stuck. One morning, the costume department found a pair of children's shoes on the cabin porch. Not props. Not part of the wardrobe. They were old. Mud-caked. Tied together by the laces. No one claimed them. No one knew how they got there. They vanished the next day. No one ever spoke of them again. The forest itself had quirks. Compass needles spun in circles. GPS maps showed trails that didn't exist. A path that was visible one day would be gone the next. The crew started marking trees with red flags just to find their way back to base camp. One of those flags went missing. It showed up 3 days later, hanging from a tree they had never marked. High, too high for anyone to have placed it without climbing gear. When they checked the footage, they saw it, blurry in the background of a wide shot. But no one noticed until after filming wrapped. The edit room came with its own challenges. Theo, the lead editor, worked in a studio space with floor-to-ceiling windows. But halfway through the edit, he covered them all with blackout curtains. Said he kept seeing things in the glass. The reflections were wrong. Scenes from different moments. A figure that wasn't in the room. He edited the final third of the film in complete darkness. But not everything strange was frightening. Some things felt connected. Like the final scene, Jessica walking alone, bruised but breathing. That scene wasn't planned the way it appears. Originally, she was supposed to stop. Speak to someone. Ask for help. But Jules kept walking. Didn't stop when the director called, "Cut." She just walked past the camera, into the trees. And the crew, for a moment, just let her go. That's the take they used. It was perfect. After the film was released, something else happened. Audiences reported similar dreams. Not of the man. Not of Jessica. But of the forest. Silent. Wide. Waiting. No monsters. Just the feeling of being watched. It's strange how a film this small, filmed on a modest budget in a quiet corner of the world, could carry such weight. How something made with minimal tools and simple bones could feel so expansive, so visceral, so alive. But maybe that's because the film didn't need effects to haunt us. It had silence. It had woods. It had the echo of footsteps just out of frame. And a woman who refused to be erased. It opens with distance. Not a scream. Not a siren. Just the slow drone of tires along a forgotten highway and the muted breath of a woman driving into nowhere. And in that opening stretch of silence, long before a word is spoken or a threat revealed, the film quietly announces what kind of story this is going to be. Not loud. Not theatrical. But intimate. Relentless. And real critically, that first scene became a conversation point among reviewers for a reason. It's not just mood setting, it's character revealing. The camera sits with her for long stretches without cutting, letting us sit in her fear before we even know why she's afraid. It denies us exposition and instead builds tension from absence. Who is she? Why is she alone? What is she running from? We're not told. We're made to feel it. That emotional trust placed on the audience is what critics began calling the film's empathetic minimalism. It never explains. It observes. And by doing so, it drags us into the story on a gut level. The moment the man appears, first in the distance, then in conversation, shifts the film into a second gear. Critics often pointed to this scene as a textbook example of how real-world terror translates to cinematic dread. There's nothing overtly sinister in his first appearance. Just a smile that lasts a little too long. A pause that stretches. A casual familiarity that comes too quickly. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't raise his voice. He just watches. And somehow, that's worse. This is where the film begins its tightrope walk between horror and psychological realism. There's no mask, no claws, no supernatural reveal. The monster is a man. And his horror is not in what he does, but in how ordinary he is. One critic wrote, "The film's villain is terrifying because we've all met him. We've all been smiled at by someone who made our skin crawl and then told ourselves to stop overreacting." That's the weapon the movie uses most effectively: familiarity. Each significant event unfolds. This is where the film begins its tightrope walk between horror and psychological realism. There's no mask, no claws, no supernatural reveal. The monster is a man. And his horror is not in what he does, but in how ordinary he is. One critic wrote, "The film's villain is terrifying because we've all met him. We've all been smiled at by someone who made our skin crawl and then told ourselves to stop overreacting." That's the weapon the movie uses most effectively: familiarity. Each significant event unfolds not with surprise, but with inevitability. The police station scene, for instance, was dissected by reviewers as a masterstroke in quiet despair. Jessica does what every woman is told to do. She notices something wrong. She documents it. She tells someone. She remains calm. She seeks help. And she's dismissed. That moment, just a woman explaining a problem to a man in uniform who listens politely but does nothing, hit hard with audiences. Because it wasn't played for drama. It was played for truth. No dramatic music. No shouting. Just another door closing in the face of someone who's already learned to expect it. Critics described that moment as the heartbeat of the film's social commentary. It doesn't scream about misogyny or systemic failure. It doesn't need to. It shows it. And in doing so, it makes the viewer complicit. We know she's right. We know she's in danger. And yet, we are as powerless as she is to make the system move. The scenes that follow, the stalking, the chase through the woods, are relentless, but never gratuitous. The violence is sparse, but heavy. The fear, constant but grounded. And every time Jessica tries to carve out a moment of safety, it's ripped from her. But what critics loved was that the film never made her a victim in the way so many thrillers do. It didn't romanticize her pain. It didn't turn her into a plot device. It let her be terrified and competent at the same time. One particular event, the river sequence, became the subject of analytical essays across several major film journals. Not because it was flashy, but because of how it captured survival as an act of surrender. Jessica doesn't leap into the water to fight back. She lets the current take her. She gives herself to chaos, and in doing so, escapes. That moment, soaking wet and freezing in a muddy ditch miles downstream, was described by one reviewer as the emotional fulcrum of the film. It's the point where Jessica stops trying to outthink her situation and instead adapts to it completely. She stops hoping the world will save her. And she begins to survive as if no one is coming. The film's use of geography, especially the forest, is another subject that drew critical acclaim. Critics spoke about the landscape not as a backdrop, but as a living, breathing extension of Jessica's psychological state. The woods are not just wilderness, they are confusion, repetition, isolation. Every tree looks the same. Every path loops. It's a place designed to disorient. And yet, it's also the only place where she's beyond his control. The cabin scene marked a shift in tone and in critical interpretation. Up to that point, the film thrived on motion, the chase, the hunt, the escape. But inside the cabin, everything stops. The predator speaks. And we're forced to listen. Not because we want to, but because Jessica must. This scene became one of the most polarizing among critics. Some saw it as a masterclass in psychological horror. Others found it too slow, too indulgent. But what everyone agreed on was its impact. The villain's monologue is not full of evil proclamations or manic laughter. It's empty, cold, ordinary. And that's what makes it terrifying. He justifies. He explains. He thinks he's owed something. He believes that being seen justifies the pain he causes. One critic wrote, "His evil is not monstrous, it is mundane." And that's what lingers. From that moment on, the film moves into its most visceral section, the final escape, the crash, the confrontation. But again, the filmmakers avoid spectacle. When Jessica fights back, it's not triumphant. It's messy. Desperate. Her choices aren't fueled by anger or empowerment. They're fueled by the simple, brutal desire to live. That's what sets this film apart in critical discussions. It doesn't play into catharsis. There's no rousing musical score as she overpowers him. No slow-motion takedown. Just reality. He bleeds. She bleeds. The violence is raw, not choreographed. And in the end, she doesn't stand over his body and declare victory. She just walks away. The final scene, her walking alone, was praised for its silence. Critics described it as a quiet revolution, a refusal to glamorize recovery. She's not healed. She's not victorious. But she's breathing. And she's still here. Emotionally, the film resonated on a level few thrillers manage to reach. Because at its core, it wasn't about being hunted. It was about being disbelieved, dismissed, isolated. It was about how women are trained to question their instincts, to explain their fear, to justify their safety. And it was about what happens when they finally stop apologizing for surviving. The critical response mirrored that emotional weight. Some hailed it as one of the best survival thrillers of the decade. Others praised it for its minimalist storytelling, its refusal to sensationalize, its stark visual language. But nearly all agreed, it didn't feel like a film. It felt like an experience. Something you lived through. Something you carried because in the end, Jessica is not a hero in the way films often define it. She is not fearless. She is not strong in the traditional sense. She is scared. She is exhausted. She is alive. And for once, that was enough. There was no grand studio lot. No sprawling set teeming with lights and megaphones. Just a remote stretch of forest, thick with silence and shadow, and a small crew that woke every day knowing they were making something raw, stripped, and unsettlingly real. The production of this film was never meant to be easy, nor was it designed for comfort. It was an experience meant to mirror the story it was telling. Intimate, isolated, and always, always on edge. It started with location. The director, John Hyams, wanted a setting that didn't feel like Hollywood pretending to be wilderness. He wanted a place that breathed on its own, a forest that felt infinite, roads that felt like they led somewhere you'd never return from. He scouted Oregon personally, avoiding popular trails and well-known spots. What he found was a cluster of dense woods and abandoned roads just beyond public reach. No cell towers. No nearby towns. Just miles of earth, trees, and sky. That became the stage. But filming there was like carving the movie out of the land itself. The terrain was unforgiving. Some days, Crew members had to hike in with gear on their backs because vehicles couldn't pass through the narrow, root-covered paths. The forest floor was constantly damp, the air always heavy with mist. Equipment malfunctioned. Drones lost signal. And then there was the silence, the kind that made every rustling branch or distant footstep feel like part of the story. To Hyams, that was a gift. He leaned into it. He instructed the sound department to record not just ambient noise, but the breathing of the forest itself, leaves shifting, animals watching, water moving unseen. These sounds became a foundation for the film's tense soundscape. We weren't just shooting in the woods, the sound designer said. We were listening to them. The trees talk if you give them time. The cast and crew lived close by in cabins, rustic ones, with just enough electricity to charge equipment. There were no trailers, no separation between work and rest. Everyone was in it together, and that created a strange intimacy. Jules Willcox, who played Jessica, often started her mornings alone, walking barefoot in the mist just to connect with the atmosphere. She'd walk the perimeter of the cabin, let the cold bite at her skin, breathe in the damp stillness. I wanted to carry the forest with me into every scene, she said. I wanted it under my nails, in my throat. There was no green screen. No artificial light beyond what the crew carried in their hands or mounted on poles. Scenes at night were lit with the kind of care usually reserved for portraits, practical lighting from flashlights, car headlamps, fires. It created a mood that wasn't cinematic in the traditional sense, but deeply unsettling. One camera operator described it like shooting a ghost story where the ghost might be us. The film was shot in sequence, which is rare for independent films due to budget constraints. But Hyams insisted on it. He wanted the progression of fear, fatigue, and desperation to build organically. If we're asking the audience to live in her fear, we need to live in it first, he told the crew. And that fear, it started to bleed off the screen. During one night shoot, a grip wandered away from set during a break, just to get some air, he said. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. When he finally returned, he was pale, trembling, and couldn't articulate what he'd seen. Just a figure, he said. No details. No explanation. He stayed until the end of the shoot, but never stepped into the woods alone again. Stories like that started piling up. Unexplained equipment glitches. Walkie-talkies that picked up static patterns, sometimes rhythmic, like breathing. Lights flickering without power surges. A backup battery pack disappeared one day, only to be found 500 yards from set, sitting neatly in the center of a mossy clearing no one remembered walking through. But not all strange moments were eerie. Some were absurdly human. During a particularly intense scene, Jessica hiding beneath a fallen tree, camera crew crouched low to capture the tension. A squirrel dropped a pine cone directly onto Hyams' head. The take was perfect, the mood razor-sharp, and then, thunk! Laughter broke out. It was the first time in days anyone had laughed on set. "It's good," Hyams said, rubbing his head. "Even nature wants to remind us we're being too serious." Then there was the van. Jessica's vehicle in the film was a real, functioning moving van the crew purchased off Craigslist. It had its own quirks, a sticky ignition, a mysterious rattle, and an AC unit that would turn on by itself. Jules drove it in almost every scene, often navigating real forest roads without a stunt double. One day, the van wouldn't start. Mechanics couldn't figure it out. Hours passed. Finally, a prop assistant realized the problem. Someone had placed the ignition key next to a magnetized flashlight, which had slightly demagnetized the chip. The van had, in a very literal sense, rejected the artificial light. The final cabin scene, the confrontation between Jessica and the man, was one of the most emotionally taxing sequences. It was shot over 2 long days, mostly in silence between takes. Jules and Marc Menchaca, who played the antagonist, barely spoke off-camera. Not by request, but by instinct. "We were both carrying something we didn't want to break by joking around," Jules said later. The tension was so thick during one take that the boom operator forgot to breathe, passed out for a few seconds, and had to be pulled aside to recover. That scene, raw and difficult, ended with a single, unscripted detail. When Jessica fires the flare gun, the shot was intended to be a standard visual effect. But the actual flare burned hotter than expected, creating a flash of light that startled the entire crew. It wasn't dangerous, but the panic in the moment was real. The scream Jules let out wasn't planned. And the footage was used as is, unaltered, because it captured something electric, the line between acting and instinct dissolving completely. And then came post-production. The edit room was kept dim. By choice. The editor said bright lights made it harder to feel the movie. He cut in silence, no temp music, no distractions. Just breath, movement, and dread. He layered in forest sounds not from the location audio, but from tapes recorded months earlier during thunderstorms and animal migrations. "You have to hear the trees remembering," he said cryptically. "They hold more than we see." The score, what little there is, was composed using actual field recordings, wind, insects, rocks rubbing together. The composer bent and stretched the sounds into ambient tension, creating music without instruments. At one point, he buried a microphone in soil and recorded the vibrations of distant footsteps, slowing them down to create a low hum that plays beneath a pivotal chase. Most viewers don't notice it consciously, but they feel it. The film's final shot, Jessica walking into the distance, was unplanned. She was supposed to stop, turn back, acknowledge something. But Jules just kept walking. And Hyams didn't yell, "Cut." The crew stood silent as she faded into the trees. That moment stayed. And it became the ending. What makes this film's production so compelling isn't just how it was made, but why it was made that way. Every decision, from the location to the pacing, was rooted in emotional honesty. It didn't need big effects or elaborate setups. It needed breath. It needed silence. It needed the terrifying truth of what it means to be hunted, and what it takes to keep moving in the end. The film wasn't just about survival. It was survival. Shot by shot. Scene by scene. In a forest that remembered everything. It begins with a road. Endless and coiled, framed by trees that stretch into the sky like they're trying to block out the sun. The asphalt is cracked and glistening, reflecting a low-hanging sky that never quite clears. There's no music in these early frames, just the hum of tires and the hollow quiet of somewhere far removed from anything familiar. Already, the setting is speaking. It's not just a backdrop, but a character, whispering things we don't fully understand yet. That road is where we meet her. Alone. Driving toward nowhere and away from something we're never told in words. But the landscape understands. The scenery around her isn't designed for beauty. It's stripped bare, unwelcoming, and indifferent. Trees press in on both sides like watchers, silent and unmoving. Everything feels damp, heavy, and slightly off-center. Like nature itself is holding its breath. The story could have been set anywhere. But it chose the Pacific Northwest wilderness for a reason. Not for postcard vistas or dramatic peaks, but for its density. Its claustrophobia. Its ancient silence. The trees here don't just block sight, they muffle sound. They isolate. In this film, the wilderness is not freedom. It is confinement. Once the van turns off the highway, once she slips into the woods, the world narrows. Her space to move, to breathe, to think, it all begins to shrink. And that's exactly the point. The setting begins to take over. It becomes a living pressure, felt more than seen. When she parks her van at night in the empty rest stop, you feel the air change. The camera lingers on the stillness of the forest, the way the darkness thickens beyond the reach of headlights. There's no movement. No birds. Just the uneasy hum of electricity from the van, as though even it knows something is wrong. And when the man first appears, the setting doesn't shift, it simply continues. That's the most unsettling part. There's no storm rolling in. No sudden music cue. Just him. As natural and menacing as another tree on the horizon. Much of the story unfolds in places that feel real, too real. Gas stations with humming fluorescents. Dingy police stations that smell of old coffee and outdated furniture. These aren't designed. They're found. Lived in, stained, dim. The production chose to shoot in locations that required very little dressing. They wanted spaces that felt like someone had just left them. Like something had happened before we got there and something else would happen after we leave. And the van. Her van. It deserves to be treated as a setting in itself. It's not a vehicle. It's a cocoon. A cell. A moving fortress. The way the camera frames her inside it, tight, intimate, always from angles that box her in, mirrors her internal state. The windshield is wide, but it never feels freeing. The windows always feel like eyes watching her from the outside. The mirrors aren't for checking traffic, they're for checking the past. That van is the last piece of her old life, and as it gets damaged, dirted, dented, it becomes a reflection of what she's going through. But then she enters the forest. And everything changes. The woods become something else entirely. Not just setting, but antagonist. It's here that the cinematography begins to flex its quiet brilliance. Wide shots are rare. Most of the forest scenes are framed close, handheld, following her movements like a second skin. Branches cut across the lens. Focus slips and recenters. The world becomes uncertain, even to the camera itself. There's no aerial establishing shot, no map of the terrain. Just tree after tree, shadow after shadow, making the viewer as lost as she is. The palette shifts too. From the dull grays and browns of roadside America to the deep greens and blacks of the forest. But not the lush, vibrant greens of life. These are the greens of moss and mold, of decay. The kind that makes everything feel damp and dying. The light filters through the trees in thin blades, never quite touching the ground. Daytime feels like dusk. Nighttime feels like a void. The cinematography doesn't chase beauty. It chases truth. And the truth is, this place doesn't care if you survive. When she hides, the forest hides with her. When she runs, the trees blur like bars. And when she screams, the woods swallow the sound. Sound design here is another extension of the setting. The film resists a traditional score. There are no sweeping strings or sudden stabs of music to cue you. Instead, the sound is built from environment. Wind through leaves, the creak of bark, the distant thud of a footstep that may or may not be there. It's oppressive in its minimalism. You start to listen harder, trying to pick out what's real and what's just your imagination. That's exactly the point. And then there's the cabin. Remote, crooked, wrong. It's never introduced with fanfare. She simply wakes up inside it. No dramatic reveal. Just wood. Nails. A single window that lets in too much cold light. The walls feel like they've watched things happen. The fireplace crackles not with warmth, but with threat. The colors here are drained, wood gray, dust brown, blood black. There's nothing human about the space, even though it was clearly made for people. The camera never gives us a full view. No wide shot to orient us. Just corners. Fragments. As if the cabin itself is hiding parts of itself. That fragmented approach is crucial. It keeps us disoriented. We never know if there's another door behind the camera, another trap waiting just out of frame. The cabin breathes like a lung. It contracts with her fear. Later, when she escapes, the forest doesn't offer relief. It offers a different kind of horror. Because now it's wintered over. The earth is harder. The river colder. The trees bare and sharpened. The cinematography adjusts again. Colors fade further, edges blur more frequently, and motion slows. The chase becomes a battle not just against the man, but against the landscape itself. Every movement costs something. Every step is through water, over ice, into pain. Even during moments of near escape, the setting refuses to let up. When she finally flags down the truck driver, the road doesn't widen. The horizon doesn't clear. The sky remains oppressive. And when the man reappears, blocking the road like he's part of the forest itself, we realize there's no such thing as safe ground here. The forest extends beyond the trees. It's psychological now. Permanent. And in the final scene, after everything, the setting still speaks. She walks away, not into sunlight, not into safety, but into more trees. The sky is still gray. The road still cracked. But the camera, for the first time, pulls back just slightly. It lets her have space. Not freedom, but space. A sliver of openness. And that's all we're given. Not closure. Not triumph. Just breath and distance. The genius of this film's setting isn't in how it looks, but in how it feels. It's not decorative. It's emotional. Every location mirrors her state of mind. The tighter her world becomes, the tighter the camera frames her. The more hopeless she feels, the more color drains from the screen. When she finally acts, the film gives her just a little more light. And the silence? The silence is everywhere. That's what lingers when the film ends. The sound of nothing. The weight of trees. The knowledge that somewhere, out there, the woods are still watching. There was a moment near the beginning of the shoot when everything went completely still. Not because the cameras were rolling or the director had called quiet on set, but because of something much stranger. A dense fog had settled over the Oregon woods overnight, and by morning, the entire forest seemed like it had been erased. The crew emerged from their cabins to find their equipment buried in mist. Lights were just faint halos. Trees disappeared 5 feet ahead. No one spoke for a long time. It wasn't eerie in the way you'd expect. It was reverent. Like the forest was reminding everyone, "You are guests here." That moment set the tone. This wasn't a shoot powered by spectacle or big-budget indulgence. It was a small crew, fewer than 50 people, nestled in a stretch of wilderness that felt like it had never been touched by cinema before. Every creak in the trees, every gust of wind, it all felt alive. The kind of set where people whispered even when they didn't have to, as though too much noise would wake something best left undisturbed. John Hyams, the director, had a rule early on. No one yells. Not even in frustration. Not even when something breaks. Because in a setting like this, with actors constantly teetering on emotional edges, the quiet had to be preserved. He called it holding the air. It became a kind of mantra. Everyone learned to move softly, speak gently, and let the forest be the loudest thing in the frame. The cabins where the crew stayed were old ranger lodges, barely insulated, with uneven floors and wood-burning stoves. The only Wi-Fi came from a single portable router that had to be hoisted on a stick outside the main cabin window to catch a faint signal. Texts would arrive in batches. Calls would drop in seconds. It created a strange sense of freedom. Time slowed. Mornings started with black coffee, made in silence. Evenings ended with beers around a fire pit, wrapped in blankets, sharing ghost stories, many of them inspired by what they had just filmed. Jules Willcox, who played Jessica, slept in the smallest cabin. Just a cot, a heater, and a narrow window that looked into the woods. She didn't keep curtains on it. "I wanted to wake up afraid," she laughed in an interview. "I wanted to wake up and remember what it felt like to be hunted." Every morning before dawn, she'd run lines to herself by whispering them out loud as she walked barefoot on the cabin deck, wrapped in her character's jacket, trying to feel the chill the way Jessica would. Marc Menchaca, who played the antagonist, kept to himself for most of the shoot. Not out of pretension, but out of instinct. He stayed in a separate cabin even farther from set, by his own request. He walked alone to and from filming, even in pitch darkness. One night, someone offered to give him a ride, and he politely declined. "It's good to be alone in your head," he said. "That's where he lives." Jules later admitted she didn't see Marc out of character until the rap party. Until then, he was just the shadow that drifted through scenes, intense and unreadable. Despite the heavy subject matter, there was laughter. Strange, sudden bursts of it, like pressure valves releasing after too much tension. During a scene where Jessica hides under a fallen tree, the director accidentally sneezed in the middle of a take. It was so loud and unexpected that the boom operator dropped his mic. Jules, mid-terror, burst out laughing. The camera kept rolling, catching that laughter turning into tears. Later, in the editing room, Hyams debated whether to use it. "It felt real," he said. "Like the moment right after your brain breaks." There were other surprises. A raccoon stole part of the catering setup one night. A bag of granola, 3 apples, and a half-full thermos of coffee. No one saw it happen. They just returned to find tiny claw prints and an overturned folding table. From that point on, every late-night meal was jokingly referred to as raccoon-proofed. The catering team began hanging snacks from tree branches in sealed bags, like campers trying to outsmart a bear. Weather was a constant wild card. Rain came without warning. Wind turned perfectly lit shots into chaos. But instead of fighting it, the crew adapted. "We treated nature like another department," said the cinematographer. "If it rained, we shot rain. If it thundered, we rolled sound." Some of the most haunting shots in the film, mist rolling in behind Jessica, leaves spiraling in slow descent, weren't planned. They were gifts. The forest directing itself. But not everything was poetic. Sometimes it was just hard. One day, the entire shoot was shut down because a bear was spotted less than 100 yards from set. Production halted immediately. No one panicked. They simply waited. A local ranger, brought in for safety consultation, sat with the team by the fire and told stories about how black bears often wander close but don't mean harm. "They're just curious," he said. "Same as us." The bear never returned, but the story stayed. One of the most emotionally charged scenes, the moment where Jessica confronts the man in the cabin, was filmed with nearly no direction. Hyams gave Jules and Marc a rough outline, then let them build the scene organically. "I didn't want it to feel blocked," he said. "I wanted the room to dictate how it moved." The result was unpredictable. At one point, Marc veered off script and said something that shook Jules so deeply she walked out of the cabin between takes, sobbing. Not because she was hurt, but because she realized she'd stopped acting. "It stopped being a scene," she said later. "It was just a moment I survived." After that shoot day, the cast and crew had a ritual. At the end of each night, someone would ring a small brass bell brought by one of the sound techs. It wasn't part of the production. It was meant as a mindfulness tool. But it became a symbol. One chime to end the day. One chime to let the weight go. The editing process was just as personal. The editor, working in a dim room in Los Angeles, often cut scenes alone with headphones, in silence. No music. Just breath and ambient noise. He created a rhythm based not on plot, but on feeling. He'd mark cuts with descriptions like heartbeat slows, panic peak, and numb descent. The film's pacing, its eerie, deliberate tempo, was shaped by emotional beats, not action ones. Even the score avoided traditional structure. The composer used field recordings captured on location, twigs snapping, water dripping, insects buzzing, and warped them into tones. No orchestra. No synths. Just the environment itself, bent into sound. "The forest was the score," he said. "We just had to listen differently." At the end of production, when the final scene was filmed, Jessica walking alone into the woods, something unexpected happened. As the camera rolled, a light breeze picked up. Leaves began to fall slowly around Jules as she walked. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rigged. It was just nature aligning one last time with the story they were telling. No one yelled cut. No one moved. When she disappeared out of frame, the entire crew stood in silence for a beat longer than they needed to. It felt right to leave the moment untouched. That was the last shot of the entire film. At the wrap party, held in a small local bar 20 minutes from the shooting location, someone played an old guitar, badly. The makeup artist made a cake with "Still Here" written in red frosting. And Jules and Marc, for the first time, sat next to each other like strangers meeting anew. They shared a beer. She smiled. He said, "Thanks for not killing me too early." Behind every film is a machine. Schedules, call sheets, endless logistics. But some productions leave behind more than just footage. They leave behind echoes. And this one? It left behind a sense of having told something true. Not just because of the story, but because of how it was lived. Together. Quietly. In a forest that kept every secret. There's a certain kind of silence that isn't empty, it's charged. The silence that clings to trauma, the kind that lives in the spaces between breaths, between thoughts. That's the silence this film swims in. Not because it has nothing to say, but because it has too much to scream and no room to scream it. Every frame is stitched together with it. Every shot pulses with it. This is a story that doesn't just tell you what fear feels like, it makes you carry it in your bones. The central theme isn't hidden. It doesn't need to be. It stares back from every moment, every decision. Survival. Not the glossy, heroic kind. Not the kind where the character rises and triumphs and stands tall against fire. No. This is about the kind of survival that costs you. The kind that leaves something behind. That unglamorous, breath-by-breath survival where the only victory is not disappearing. Jessica is our mirror for this. She doesn't arrive in the story as a survivor. We meet her in the middle of unraveling. Her grief isn't performative. It's worn, quiet, and real. She's not running away from something as much as she's running out of something, escaping the suffocating wreckage of her past. And in that, we glimpse the first layer of the film's thematic skeleton, grief as erosion. The death of her husband, referenced only in fragments and phone calls, is not treated as exposition. It's treated like a wound she keeps pressing on, just to make sure it's still real. Her choice to be alone, to stay in motion, isn't framed as courage or recklessness. It's just how grief works sometimes. Movement as avoidance. Isolation as protection. Her silence isn't dramatic. It's familiar. And that's what gives it weight. But grief is just the start. The deeper this story digs, the more it reveals itself to be about control. Who has it? Who takes it? Who loses it? Every interaction between Jessica and the man who begins to follow her is a study in imbalance. His weapon isn't just physical. It's social. He steps into her space. Smiles when she doesn't. Talks when she's quiet. Asks questions with answers he already knows. That's how power works. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, invades, and waits. This imbalance is everywhere. In the way the police dismiss her. In the way strangers second-guess her instincts. In the way she has to apologize for reacting to danger. And the most harrowing part? She knows how the world sees her. She knows that if she's too angry, she's unstable. Too calm, she's suspect. Too emotional, she's unreliable. Too quiet, she's forgettable. The system is rigged, not with violence, but with silence. And Jessica, like so many women, has learned to navigate that silence like a map of landmines. This is where the film leans hard into its most chilling theme, invisibility. Jessica doesn't just feel unseen. She is unseen. The world around her forgets her the moment she leaves a room. She goes to the police, speaks with urgency, lays out facts. And still they doubt. Still they hesitate. Because they don't see danger the way she feels it. This dissonance is what makes the story so unbearable in its honesty. She isn't just fighting one man. She's fighting the whole quiet machinery that tells her she's imagining things. That's where the symbolism begins to take root. The van she drives is not just transportation. It's armor. A cocoon. A shell she moves inside like a turtle afraid to touch the world. Its rattles and hums mirror her anxiety. Its claustrophobic interior reflects the cage she's built to keep grief and fear in. And when it breaks down, when it can no longer protect her, she is quite literally thrown into the wild. And the wild, the forest, becomes the film's most vivid metaphor. At first glance, the woods are just terrain. But they quickly become a manifestation of Jessica's internal landscape. The trees are endless. The paths loop. The light never fully reaches the ground. She's not just lost in the forest, she's lost in herself. The further she goes, the less she's sure of anything. The forest becomes a mirror to her trauma, repetitive, silent, disorienting. But it's not just menace. It's also resilience. Every root she trips over, every branch she breaks through, it's part of her slow re-entry into herself. Nature doesn't save her, but it strips away everything false. In the forest, there's no room for pretense. Just instinct. Breath. The next step. The next hiding place. She's not becoming stronger in the action movie sense. She's becoming realer. More herself. Not defined by what happened to her, but by what she chooses to do next. Another layer of symbolism is found in the flare gun, a small object, easy to miss, but loaded with meaning. It's a tool for signaling help. But when she uses it, it's not to call for rescue. It's a weapon. A last, desperate burst of light in the dark. Fire is visibility. Fire is voice. In that moment, the flare gun becomes the opposite of silence. It's her scream made manifest, aimed not at the sky, but at the face of the man who tried to erase her. And speaking of him, the man who follows, traps, and torments her, his character is built entirely out of entitlement. He doesn't rant or rave. He doesn't monologue about power or domination. He speaks in calm, condescending tones. He frames himself as reasonable, as misunderstood. His evil is not flamboyant. It's banal. And that's what makes it worse. He believes he's owed something. That his pain justifies his actions. That being ignored makes him dangerous. He is, in many ways, a walking embodiment of toxic invisibility turned violent. He is what happens when someone refuses to accept that the world doesn't revolve around them. And his greatest sin isn't just that he stalks her, it's that he believes she should understand him. Jessica's refusal to understand him, to engage with his story, is one of the film's most radical choices. She never asks why. Never digs into his psyche. She doesn't treat him like a villain with depth. She treats him like a threat. And that refusal becomes an act of rebellion. In most thrillers, there's a climax of confrontation. A moment where the survivor explains their pain, or the killer reveals their motive. But not here. Here, the confrontation is one of silence. Breathing. Escaping. Persisting. That brings us to another quiet, powerful theme, resistance without spectacle. Jessica's resistance is not loud. It's not explosive. It's not even dramatic. It's a slow accumulation of choices. Don't freeze. Don't cry. Keep moving. She doesn't get stronger in a traditional sense. She just becomes more awake. Every injury, every setback, every betrayal chips away at the version of her that was apologizing for existing. And by the end, all that's left is someone who knows how to endure. The film also deals, with subtle elegance, in the theme of transformation without redemption. Jessica doesn't overcome her trauma. She doesn't emerge smiling or healed. She emerges tired, bloodied, and alive. And that's enough. The final image of her walking alone, no music, no fanfare, no final line, feels like the truest resolution the story could offer. She's not rescued. She rescues herself. But more importantly, she doesn't do it to prove anything. She does it because she must.